Section 13 of Going Abroad, Some Advice. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by BettyB. Going Abroad, Some Advice by Robert Luce. Somewhat Financial, Part 2. Where to buy specialties to advantage. It is chiefly by reason of specialties that European shopping can rightfully attract American buyers, not alone because special application to any one industry by a large part of the people of a locality is sure to make its price cheap, but also because an excess of production results in greater latitude for selection. Geneva may again illustrate, for besides watches, it makes a specialty of music boxes, and nowhere else can you find such a variety at such cheap prices. Of other specialties the tourist will do well to buy: tortoiseshell, coral, and lava in Naples, wood carving in Switzerland, the Black Forest, Sorrento, Norway, and Sweden, olive wood articles at the Italian lakes, silver and gold filigree work in Genoa, cameos, mosaics, and many other kinds of ornaments in Florence, Venice, and Rome, Florence being the cheapest. Pearls and turquoises in Rome and Florence. The cheaper stones, amethyst, topaz, cairngorns, etc., in Switzerland and Scotland. Toilet articles, soaps, perfumes, sponges, etc., in the German cities and in Paris. Venetian glass, of course, in Venice. Artistic plaster in Paris. Hammered brass in Northern Africa. Porcelain pictures in Lucerne and Dresden. Letter paper in London. Umbrellas in Milan or Switzerland. Artificial flowers in Paris. Furs in Germany or Scandinavia. Woolen underwear in London and Germany. Silk underwear in Sorrento, Milan, and France. Gloves in Naples, Genoa, Milan, Paris, and London. Linen handkerchiefs, etc., in Belfast. Embroidery in Rennes and other Breton towns. Laces in Venice, Seville, and Belgium, the prices for real Valenciennes being somewhat lower in Bruges and Ghent than in Antwerp and Brussels. Silks in Lyons and in Genoa, Milan, and other places in northern Italy. Visitors often buy in the Italian lake towns plaid silk shawls to take home for waists. A shawl large enough to furnish material for a blouse may generally be bought for less than an equal amount of silk sold by the yard. Cutlery, old silverware, and Sheffield plate in London. Engravings and all reproductions in Berlin. It will be noticed that in the foregoing list the names of Italian cities predominate. It is the general rule abroad that as you go south, prices drop. The easier it is to live, the lower the price the workman will take, and the easier it is to live, the more children, and so the more competition for work. That is why Italy abounds in bargains. Tariffs and taxes appear to affect the matter very little. Neither free trader nor protectionist can justifiably be made more partisan by a journey through Europe. Rather, he is likely to return with the impression that the tariff is a less important political issue than he had supposed. When you can buy things cheaper in high tariff and tax-ridden Italy than in no tariff England, and when Holland without any industry to protect is the dearest country of all, what can you argue? Explain too, if you can, why Paris should be one of the costliest places in the world. It would be equally hard to explain why all America thinks Paris the cheapest place in the world, and why it is the Mecca of every fair shopper. To be sure, its dressmakers set the fashion for all womankind, though its women are not the best dressed, that honor belonging to the Americans, who with their own good taste modify Parisian ideas. Outside the costuming establishments, as a shopping city, it does not begin to compare with New York. It hasn't so many elegant shops, the shop windows are not so attractive, the system of doing business is not so convenient, and the prices are not so reasonable. In neither of its two great department stores, the Bon Marché and the Louvre, did I notice any department excelling in variety or quality of stock similar departments in the big stores of Boston. Americans who dwell in Paris will unanimously advise their countrymen, and particularly their countrywomen, to buy necessary things anywhere else rather than there. Particularly in the matter of all cotton goods, is it wasteful for the traveler to postpone expenditure till the ocean has been crossed. We grow the cotton, we have the best mills, and we undersell the world. In all footwear, too, we are in the lead, foreign boots and shoes of equal quality being higher in price, inferior in style, and less comfortable in fit. In the art of window dressing, our merchants have gone far ahead of those in Paris, London, and all other foreign cities. This is chiefly due to a difference in shopping methods. In London, for example, it is common for buyers to go from window to window till they see what they want, and so the merchant crowds into his window as many things as he can, regardless of the general effect. The department stores to be found in London, Paris, and a few other cities have fixed prices, but save in Germany they are almost the only foreign stores that do. The farther south you go, the more you must beat down, and by the time you reach Oriental countries, a quarter of the price demanded is what should be given. Be patient and firm, and you will get the article at that figure. In the smaller Italian stores, the proprietor can be forced down from a quarter to a third. If you give him what he asks, he is ashamed of himself for not having asked more. In the larger stores, a discount of 10 or 15% is not hard to get. Swiss prices fluctuate according to the persistence of the buyer. Bargaining is half the fun of buying laces in Brussels. Do not proclaim that you are an American. On this point deceive the shopkeeper if your knowledge of the language will let you. Foolish Americans have spread abroad the notion that all Americans are fabulously rich, and prices jump up the moment a customer's American origin is betrayed. A friend among the natives of the city where you may be can save you considerable amounts by buying for you what you have decided to purchase. I had gathered the impression while touring in Germany that it was an exception to the continental rule of a flexible price list, and that the same charges prevailed for native and foreigner, but I am informed that in all German cities where Americans reside in any number, such as Berlin and Dresden, they are systematically overcharged from 30 to 60% in everything. Moreover, it is asserted that German courts do not deal out even-handed justice in matters where tradespeople are at issue with foreigners. As for that, litigation is not cheerful for the American anywhere on the continent. For instance, the story goes that in Venice an American visited a dealer in antique furniture and saw a very beautiful set of carved furniture. The price was 12,000 lire. He ordered a duplicate of the set which was on exhibition, and as a guarantee of his responsibility paid the dealer 2,000 lire. The dealer pocketed the money and never filled the order. The American consul attempted to compel him to manufacture the goods and forward them, but he insolently refused to do so, and he also refused to return the money. The court showed no disposition to help the American, and the money was lost. On the other hand, many a continental shopkeeper will tell you that no American ever cheated him. As a consequence, it is easy for an American to get trusted. But the credit practice is as foolish abroad as it is at home. Everywhere a cash bargain is the better for the buyer. In certain German towns, they are quick to imprison foreigners if it is suspected that they intend leaving the country before settling their accounts. The confidence of the European shopkeeper astonishes the American. Tradespeople never refuse to send goods to a hotel for inspection, and frequently invite the opportunity. The milliners of London and Paris will gladly deliver a dozen boxes of hats that one may keep a day before selecting, and apparently have not the least fear that a few hours' wear will be borrowed. Likewise, they will deliver shoes, underwear, anything else. If you don't like it, return it. The Bon Marché in Paris won some of its reputation by the rule that uninjured goods may be returned at any time in exchange for the original price, and instances are told of returns made a year after the purchase. Though so much leniency is not universal, it is the custom abroad to refund the money for goods returned. Seldom is any deposit asked for goods that are ordered for future delivery. In Rennes we were in bicycle costume with no luggage in sight except what was on our wheels, and yet the embroidery merchant seemed pleased to take an order without deposit for some articles to overtake us by mail, that we were not to accept if they did not suit our fancy, though the making of them meant several days of labor. I hear a good deal of grumbling about purchases made abroad and shipped direct to an American address, not because of the dealer's bad faith, but because of the charges for broker's commission, warehouse storage, cartage, steamship transportation, tariff, freight, and so on, which make it extravagant to buy abroad in this manner anything that can be duplicated at home, no matter how alluring may be the foreign prices. The dealer's assurance that the article will be safely delivered in Chicago, New Orleans, or where you please is all right, and perhaps he believes what he says when he declares that the cost will be trifling, but that is not the fact. Never take a guide or professional interpreter when you go shopping on the continent. You will always get a commission on what you buy, and it will come out of you. All the big stores have somebody who speaks English. In the little shops, if you haven't mastered the oral use of the numerals of the country, which should be your first duty on entering it, a pencil and paper will bring into play the Arabic numerals common to all civilized lands. Collectors of curios and antiques must everywhere abroad be on their guard against deception. The Germans have large and prosperous factories for making antique lamps, corroded bronzes, rusty swords, battered armor, ancient potteries, all sorts of relics, and these are shipped to the appropriate place for their sale. It is said that a German factory is hard pressed to supply the bullets that are dug up on the battlefield of Waterloo. The Turkish fez is made in Germany. Beware the Saturday half holiday in England. It is universal the year round, as much observed as Sunday, so don't count on doing any shopping then. No business is done on the 4 bank holidays, Easter Monday, Whit Monday, the first Monday in August, and December 26th. Most important of all shopping advice to the tourist is this: buy what you want when you see it. Don't indulge the American tendency to wait a while in the hope of finding the same thing at a better price. 9 times out of 10, you will not come across it again. So when a thing strikes your fancy and the price is not exorbitant, take it then and there. Souvenirs and photography. To spend money on souvenirs lacking utility may be folly, but it is charming folly. Given to friends, presents from abroad that may not have cost a franc are prized as if they were jewels, partly because of the glamour that surrounds everything European, partly because they show that distance did not drown friendship. Kept by yourself, mementos of travel refresh its memories. They are needed even though it may seem to the traveler when entranced by foreign scenes that he can never forget them. Photographs best serve this purpose, and he does well who is lavish in their purchase. Many travelers on returning regret that they bought photographs of different sizes, for it is hard to preserve them attractively in an album or any other form. As many desirable views cannot be found in any other but the common 8x10 size, it is preferable to get them all of those dimensions. Of course they should be bought unmounted, the cards being awkward and bulky to pack. Those that cost half a franc (10 cents) in Italy will cost a franc in Paris and a shilling in London. In Switzerland they are cheaper than in Paris and dearer than in Italy, but better than either Paris or Italy. Indeed, to my mind, the Swiss photographs are the best ordinarily exposed for sale in Europe. By going to the maker, you can get the widest scope for selection, and fresher pictures than those to be found on the shop counters, but that is not important enough to warrant inconvenience. Since the hand camera using films has been perfected, it is worthwhile taking your own views, but not of places of which you can buy photographs. It is foolish for the amateur to start out with the idea of photographing all the fine buildings and beautiful landscapes he may see. In 9 cases out of 10, his pictures will cost more and be poorer than those he might buy. At home it is well enough to experiment and practice. Abroad time is too precious for that. So it is more important to snap the shutter at views with personal interest than at those with artistic value. The outlook from your hotel window, a country railway station, the flower market, a peasant costume, the diligence in which you crossed an Alpine pass, glimpses from a railway car, the Strand or the Avenue de l'Opéra at midday, a Neapolitan cab driver, your hotel at Venice. Such are the subjects that will always pleasantly refresh your own memory and make your descriptions more enjoyable to the friends at home. These friends will be bored if you talk about the Louvre, the Falls of the Rhine, the Pantheon, St. Mark's. What they want to hear about is the life abroad, and an impertinent beggar arouses their interest more than the Venus de Medici. So if you take pictures for any but a purely selfish purpose, always have life in them, and the more odd and grotesque that life, the better. For that matter, every photograph should have a living being in it, man, woman, child, or animal, both for the sake of animation and to give the eye a standard of measurement. Don't be afraid of getting too near your subject. It is not worth while to carry abroad a camera using plates. The film camera is bulky enough, goodness knows, and many a time you will wish it at the bottom of the sea, yet on the whole you will be glad of having taken it. The 4x5 size best combines good work and portability, but after trying it on one tour and a folding pocket on another, I incline toward the smaller one on the score of convenience, particularly if it is to be carried on a bicycle. Its pictures do not average so well in excellence, but they serve the purpose, that is, they suffice to recall the scenes and to help entertainment. Larger sizes than the 4x5 are cumbersome and fatiguing. Films can be secured in any large city of Europe, but a connoisseur advised me to get them all here unless a trip of many months was contemplated, as he said that though the foreign films are made from the same formula, somehow they do not produce so good results. As a precaution, however, it will be wise before starting to get from the American manufacturers lists of their foreign agencies. If the films are taken from here, have them delivered in tin canisters to protect them from the dampness of the sea voyage. If the larger rolls are taken, better expose 2 or 3 from each roll before starting, and develop them to make sure that they are perfect. The man who has never used a hand camera does a very foolish thing if he starts off on a long journey without any preliminary practice. It is all very well to advertise, "You push the button and we do the rest," but pushing the button isn't all of it by any means. The combinations of speed of shutter and sizes of stops require a clear understanding and some experience before the best results are attained. The art is not difficult. It is an easy thing to use a hand camera after you know how, but even the simplest processes will confuse a novice, and it is a pity to carry a camera over all Europe, go to the bother of hunting for good subjects, and come back to find that through ignorance of some apparently trivial thing you have spoiled half your films. When intelligent people beginning to use a camera, in spite of the plainest directions, will point it toward the source of light or press the button without removing the dust slide or cap, it seems clear that a little teaching by experience is essential. It is often thought that in buying a camera, the securing of a good lens is the all-important thing, and that the mechanism of the shutter is a minor detail. I didn't think so when my shutter refused to work in the Alhambra, a place of all places where a camera in good condition seemed most desirable. It turned out that the wooden base of the shutter mechanism had been swollen during the ocean voyage so that something was thrown out of gear, and a camera that had done long and excellent work in America was for a while not worth a cent. Nobody could be found with knowledge enough of hand cameras to repair this one, and it was weeks before my own struggle with the thing in spare moments got that shutter into condition again. Moral: have your camera thoroughly examined by an expert in such matters before you start. Wherever there is a film agency, you can get your films developed, but the foreign work in this line is not equal to the American, and it is better to wait till you get back. Yet, it may be wise to have 1 or 2 films developed now and then to see that the shutter is working right and that the film has not been damaged. Post, Express, and Telegraph. All European countries, as well as the United States and Canada, are now in the postal union, and the rates from any one country to any other are virtually the same, corresponding in the coinage of the country in question to the following on mail matter sent from the United States. Letters each ½ ounce, 5 cents. Postal cards, 2 cents. Newspapers, books, and other printed matter, each 2 ounces, 1 cent. Commercial papers. Packets not in excess of 10 ounces, for each 2 ounces or fraction thereof, 5 cents. Packets in excess of 10 ounces, for each 2 ounces or fraction thereof, 1 cent. Samples of merchandise. Packets not in excess of 4 ounces, 2 cents. Packets in excess of 4 ounces, for each 2 ounces or fraction thereof, 10 cents. Registration fee on letters or other articles, 10 cents. In the States we have for some time been accustomed to an ounce as the weight limit on the minimum letter rate, and do not at first appreciate how in foreign correspondence the half ounces count up, at 5 cents apiece. But a lesson or two will soon teach the wanderer the wisdom of falling into the general habit abroad, of using thin paper and light envelopes for the letters sent home. But those who would conform to the usage of society would hardly employ that sort of paper in answering invitations, or in any formal correspondence with persons in the country where the letter was written. Postal cards are a great convenience to those who feel under obligations to keep their relatives constantly informed as to their whereabouts and welfare. They are easily carried, easily handled, and when closely written can convey a surprising amount of information. Be careful, though, that you buy neither cards nor stamps beyond the quantity you are likely to use in the country where you may be, for they are useless in any other country. The Postal Union will not be perfect till its cards and stamps can be used anywhere within its limits. If postage is not fully prepaid on matter going from one place in the United States to another in the same country, only the balance due is collected of the receiver; but on matter going from one country to another, twice the balance due is collected. That is, if your home correspondent puts on a 2-cent stamp instead of a 5-cent stamp, you must pay 6 cents to get the letter. This seldom means much on letters, but on merchandise and printed matter it may amount to a good deal for the youth studying abroad on a very small allowance. Stories are told, at the same time laughable and pathetic, of heavy excess postage payments on Christmas cards and gifts, amounting to much more than the original cost of the articles. Of course thoughtful people will always prepay all mail matter, and will be equally careful to enclose a stamp when asking a reply from any stranger. When you send home books, periodicals, newspapers, or manuscript, not personal in nature, which go at printed matter rate, be sure that the parcel is open at both ends and tied with a string, so that it can be examined if the customs officials so wish. Merchandise must also be packed so that it can be examined. In England, at any rate, and I presume in all other countries, every parcel going out of the country must have a customs declaration respecting the contents. This must be on a form obtainable at any post office. The duties cannot be prepaid, but are collected on delivery. Articles of trivial value will probably run the gauntlet without interference. No cautious shipper ever sends a package by mail or in any other manner without having his own address on it, that he may stand some chance of recovering the goods in case the person addressed cannot be found. In the United Kingdom, compensation for loss or damage to an amount not exceeding $10 will be given without payment of any special fee. A certificate of posting has been obtained. The safest way to have one's mail come is in care of a banker. Next in point of safety are pensions, next hotels. Poste restante is understood everywhere as the equivalent of our general delivery. For letters it is commonly safe, though it may be bothersome if the postmaster chooses to demand identification. This rarely happens, but when it does, the passport comes in handy. To have parcels or newspapers addressed to the poste restante is not safe. For several weeks of a bicycle tour in France, I failed to receive a single newspaper so addressed, though many were sent to me, and though the officials repeatedly averred that there was no intention to abuse the newspaper mail, my belief is that my papers were all thrown away in the office of receipt. As soon as I returned to the use of bankers' addresses, the papers began reaching me all right. Bankers are exceedingly obliging in these matters. They will send letters or papers after one from place to place all over the continent till they catch up with the traveler. The tourist agencies are not so certain in this regard, at any rate in the summer time, for though doubtless their intentions are of the best, they are then so overworked that what probably seems the least important thing, the mail, gets slighted. By the way, when calling for mail at the poste restante, You would better write your name and hand it through the wicket. Just remember how hard you find it to understand a foreign name when spoken to yourself. Letter writing is as great a nuisance to the tourist as letter receiving is a delight. If one could only convince his home friends that it is so much better for them to give than to receive that they ought to permit the correspondence to be wholly one-sided, many an hour would not be begrudged from seeing, studying, or resting. The novice in travel is profuse in promises to write and seldom keeps them. Let the stay at home have charity. The Post Office Department calculates on 8 days for the transmission of mail from New York to London, Paris, or Bremen, 10 days to Glasgow, and as follows to other European cities by way of London: 9 days to Amsterdam, Antwerp, Berlin, Hamburg, Madrid, Rome, Rotterdam; 10 days to St. Petersburg, Stockholm, Vienna; 11 days to Constantinople; 12 days to Athens; 13 days to Alexandria. Letters or telegrams sent to passengers on the Atlantic liners should be addressed in care of the company and bear the name of steamer and date of sailing. Otherwise they will be held at the office until claimed, unless by happy chance the name is recognized as that of a passenger, which will be seldom. Letters intended to reach passengers by mail steamers touching at Queenstown on the way to America should be addressed in care of the commander of the boat in question, and should in Great Britain be posted as registered letters not later than the morning of the day the boat is to leave Liverpool. Europe has no express system corresponding precisely with ours. That is to say, it has no large express companies that monopolize the quick transportation of parcels unaccompanied by the owner. Part of the work is done by the various governments through a development of the parcels post system that the United States has not yet adopted. Part of it is done by the railroad companies themselves. A small part of it is done by forwarding agents who stand more in the position of shippers and receivers than in that of transporters. Our uniform merchandise mail rate of a cent an ounce with the 4-pound limit contrasts markedly with the English rates, ranging from 6 cents for a pound or less to 24 cents for 11 pounds, the limit, and still more with the Swiss rates, by which to send a 44-pound package costs only 30 cents, and it is cheaper to send almost anything portable by post than in any other way. To mail a traveling bag in Switzerland is common. The railways of Great Britain have 2 rate scales for parcels and merchandise, one applying if they are forwarded by passenger train, the other if by goods train, or what we call freight train. Likewise, there is a double classification on the Continent, for forwarding by grande vitesse, big quickness, as it is called in France, or by petite vitesse, little quickness. The big quickness has little quickness enough, goodness knows. A slangy American would say that one way was slow and the other dead slow. The British prices for forwarding by passenger train range from 8 cents for 2 pounds any distance to 60 cents for 24 pounds going 200 miles. This is lower than our express rates on small packages and higher on the large packages. Continental roads figure it in the same way, taking both weight and distance into account, with rates of the same general range. Freight rates, petite vitesse, are of course much lower, but it is not safe to use them if delivery more than a month later would be embarrassing. Though the goods may go through in 2 or 3 days, it is more likely to take as many weeks, and instances of as many months are not unknown. As the railroads cater for a parcels business, they maintain many receiving offices. The London and Northwestern, for example, has nearly 40 scattered through London, 60 in Birmingham. As with our express system, parcels are called for on notification at any of these offices and delivered without extra charge. Paris, too, is dotted with receiving offices of the railroads, and in all the cities one can find a bureau in the business center where he can arrange about forwarding things without having to go to the station, which is usually on the edge of the town. There are a few large concerns doing the business of forwarding agents. Their chief service to the tourist consists in the combination of storing with forwarding, and in their care of customs matters where things are sent across a boundary. For storing a trunk in London, one of these concerns charged me a shilling a month. For attending to transportation, their fee in addition to the transporting charge is equally reasonable. But implicit faith is no more to be put in them than in one of our express companies. For instance, Two young women who had ordered a trunk forwarded to Liverpool and held to the time they were to sail, sent directions early enough by mail as to the boat on which it was to be put. They reached Liverpool on Saturday afternoon, the half holiday time, to find no trunk on the steamer and the place of the forwarding agent closed. Messengers hunted for him in vain, and the young women perforce returned to the United States without any trunk. We sympathized with them, and fellow passengers lent them things, but they were not happy, and no wonder. Such mischances are rare, but they do happen now and then to people who put a blind faith in Providence and run for luck. When a forwarding agent is asked to send a trunk or any locked article across a frontier, be sure to give him the key that the customs authorities may examine the contents. He is responsible for seeing that nothing is purloined in the course of this process. The key is not needed when you forward anything by a railway company in bond, such as a trunk from Paris, addressed in care of the steamer at the foreign port from which you are to sail. By the way, purchases or clothing found to be superfluous can be forwarded to the steamship office at your sailing port and will there be held till you call for them. Of course, one should be careful that his trunk or parcel is properly labeled or tagged, with label or tag likely to stay in place. If charges are prepaid, it is wise to see that the label is properly stamped to this effect, or to notify the consignee. Carelessness in this regard cost me double on a bag sent from London to a Liverpool hotel. It is just as well not to prepay. Luggage thus sent to a hotel will be paid for by the landlord, who will take the chances of your turning up to reimburse him. One need be less on his guard against double charging and imposition in Norway and Sweden than anywhere else. Dishonesty there is the rare exception. A vehicle broke down between post stations, and there was nothing to do but pile the luggage beside the road and walk on to the next station. "But this baggage," expostulated the American, "will it be safe?" Scanning the heavens, the Norwegian driver replied, "I don't think it will rain." He could imagine no other danger. The best way to transmit money from one country to another in any amount up to $100 is by international money order. It is safe to reckon on a cost of a cent for each dollar transmitted, with a minimum cost of 10 cents. Money may be sent home in this way, or the remitter can send express orders. To cable money is rather costly. In the matter of the telegraph, as well as in that of the parcel post, the European is far ahead of us, at least in the matter of cost, though the publicists who contend for the private ownership of the telegraph and telephone maintain that our plan secures the more efficient service. But whether or not the foreigner gets his telegrams transmitted as quickly and accurately, certainly the work is done for him at a price which makes the use of the wire far more common than with us. Telegrams may be sent from any one place in the United Kingdom to any other therein at the rate of 12 cents for the first 12 words, and a cent for each additional word to France, Germany, Holland, or Belgium for 4 cents a word, to Switzerland, Italy, or Austria for 6 cents a word, to Spain for 8 cents a word. In Great Britain, the address of the receiver is charged for, but not that of the sender when written on the back of the telegraph form. The charge includes delivery within the town postal limits or within 1 mile of a head office. Beyond that limit, the charge is 12 cents a mile for the first 3 miles. If 3 or more miles, at the rate of 24 cents a mile from the office door. In France, telegrams cost a cent a word with a minimum charge of 10 cents, and the rate is not much higher in any of the European countries commonly visited. All the European cities have telephone systems, and there is a long distance telephone from London to Paris, but how much farther the system may by this time have been extended I am not informed. Cable rates between New York City and the principal countries of Europe are: Belgium, France, Germany, Great Britain, Holland, 25 cents a word; Switzerland, 30 cents; Italy and Sicily, 32; Austria and Hungary, 34; Denmark and Norway, 35; Malta, Servia, and Roumania, 36; Turkey, 37; Greece, 38; Sweden and Portugal, 39; Spain, 40; Gibraltar and Russia, 43. To these must be added the American telegraph tolls from the seaboard and the foreign tolls from the chief city. The address and signature are included in the chargeable matter, and the length of words is limited to 15 letters. When a word is composed of more than that, Every additional 15 letters or fractions thereof will be counted as a word. To save expense in the matter of address, it is the custom to file at your home office any combination of letters chosen arbitrarily with which your street address or that of your business house, relative, or friend is registered. For example, before leaving home, go to the telegraph office and direct that any message coming for Smilax, Boston, or New York, or wherever it may be, shall be delivered to such and such an address. Further economy is secured by the use of a cable code, wherein words are indexed to signify whole sentences, or at least a considerable part of sentences. If you have one copy and your correspondent's its mate, long messages can thus be transmitted by the use of a very few words. The ground is admirably covered by the Adams Cable Codex, which is published at 84 State Street, Boston, at 50 cents, and will be forwarded on receipt of price, or it may be ordered of the publishers of this volume. In this codex is a word signifying a request to the publishers to translate the other words of the message and forward them to whatever address may be desirable. So if one desires to communicate with anybody not having a codex, he has but to cable the significant word to the cable address of the codex with the other code words of his message. The cost of the book is saved several times over on the first message you may send, informing anxious friends of your safe arrival. And though you may not need to use it again, yet if the occasion arises, as from sickness at home, business necessities, or shortage of funds, the saving will be very considerable. End of section 13. Section 14 of Going Abroad, Some Advice. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by BettyB. Going Abroad, Some Advice by Robert Luce. Personalities. Passports are no longer necessary on the ordinary routes of European travel, though indispensable in Russia and the Turkish dominions, including Egypt and Palestine. They are almost never of use in England, but are occasionally desirable on the continent, and when wanted at all, are wanted very much. An American may wander through Europe for a year without ever having occasion to prove his identity, but if the occasion does arise, it is urgent. The trouble and cost of getting a passport are slight, and it is just as well to have one. The passport agent's or banker's fee can be easily saved by getting a blank application from Washington for nothing. It will be forwarded if you send request to the Passport Division, State Department, or if you are in a large city, you can get one at a law stationer's for a few cents. Fill it out, swear to it before a notary or justice of the peace, who may charge you 50 cents if you are a stranger, and then forward it with the fee of $1 to the State Department, which in due time will send you the passport. Better attend to it 2 or 3 weeks before sailing, but if you should overlook the matter till late, have it sent to you at the port of departure in care of the steamer on which you are to sail. By the way, any letters thus addressed are almost sure to reach you, and it is a pleasure to hear from home the last thing before the steamer sails. If you find yourself abroad without a passport and get into trouble by reason of its lack, apply at once for help to the nearest American consul. If you want to apply for a passport while abroad, do it through the chief diplomatic representative of the United States in the country where you may be, in his absence through the consul general or consul. If a passport is lost, a duplicate can be secured from the State Department without filling out a new blank. An English consul in Germany says that anyone who intends making a long stay there, especially in Prussia, will find it absolutely necessary to have a passport, as, according to the police regulations, house owners, lodging house keepers, etc., are bound to report within 3 days the arrival of any stranger, when original proofs of identity are invariably demanded. Passports are supposed to be required in Austria-Hungary, but are not demanded at the frontier, and are seldom called for anywhere. If the traveler expects to go to Russia, he should send or take his passport to the Russian Consul General, Alexander Oborovsky, 22 State Street, New York, that his visa may be affixed. The fee is $1.20. If the passport is sent, the sender should state the place of birth and also the form of religion professed. The excursionist planning a tour through Central Europe alone is likely to need his passport only in case registered letters or money orders are sent to him. Passports are good for 2 years, but can then be renewed on application to the State Department at Washington. Baggage. I do not know whether the Romans called their baggage impedimenta because it impeded, but I do know that in all Roget's thesaurus no truer synonym is to be found. Since traveling began, old travelers have advised new travelers to take little baggage, yet every novice takes too much. Though any but hand luggage makes additional expense that is not inconsiderable, the objection is not chiefly on the score of economy, for anybody who can afford to travel can usually afford to pay for comfort. It is on the score of convenience. Everything that is taken must be handled again and again and again. To pack and unpack a trunk takes valuable time. It is no small matter to arrange properly a traveling bag crowded with small articles. Luggage reveals more than anything else what the poet or somebody else has called the natural cussedness of inanimate objects. The traditional needle in the haystack is a crowbar compared with a thimble in a trunk. Don't take a trunk if it can be avoided. It is certainly needless for the ordinary European excursion of anything less than 3 months. Should you buy bulky articles abroad, get the trunk there, postponing its purchase as long as possible. English tourists on the continent rarely take trunks, but the number of bags and bundles they manipulate is incredible. This because hand luggage pays no railroad fares, as has been explained. If a trunk seems indispensable, take a steamer trunk, which is half the height of an ordinary trunk, and is the only kind that is allowed in staterooms. It can there be stowed under the berth. A safe height for a steamer trunk is 13 inches. If other trunks are to be taken, the simpler, plainer, and stronger they are, the better. Inventors have not had marked success in trunk devices, and though a few are good, most of them are more bother than they are worth. Baggage smashing is not so general in Europe as in America, but now and then you will see a trunk dropped from the top of an omnibus to the ground, and it is not safe to count on gentle handling. By reason of the baggage rates on continental railroads, travelers use the lightest trunks they can get, frequently buying in Paris or London the cloth-covered wicker hampers in which to bring home their purchases. I have heard of travelers who have carried these hampers about Europe without damaging them, and then had them ruined in getting from New York to Boston. The only one I ever bought was pretty nearly ruined before it got on the steamer, and I am not enthusiastic about their wearing qualities. Have your trunk marked with big colored crosses on the ends, conspicuous initials, or some other mark readily distinguished. There are frequent occasions when it must be picked out of a large pile of baggage, on wharves, in customs houses, and on the platforms of English railway stations, for the English have no check system, and every time you leave the train you must go to the luggage van and watch the trunks unloaded till yours appears. If you are to return from the port at which you land, the steamer trunk can be stored in the company's warehouse for a small fee or none. Ordinarily, the passenger leaves it in the stateroom with a tag or label showing the boat and date of return. The stewards put it in the baggage room on the dock, and when you come on board for the return trip, it is found in the stateroom. Of course, though, it is safer to avoid any chance of misunderstanding or oversight by visiting the dock long enough before sailing to make sure that somebody attends to the matter. Should you cross by the southern route to a Mediterranean port with the intention of returning from a northern port by a boat of the same line, your trunk will be sent round there with little or no charge. If you want to take the steamer trunk with you, the steamer clothes, rug, ulster, or what you please can well be put in a canvas bag you should have taken for the purpose, and stored as the trunk would have been stored. An ordinary flour sack will suffice and be quite safe. The steamer trunk has for travel on shore advantages in its compactness over the size customary with us, apart from the saving in railway charges. The American hack with its trunk rack behind is unknown abroad, where the "boxes" go on top of the cab or hansom, or else beside the driver. Though large trunks may in fact be thus carried, the small trunk is in this particular much the more convenient for all concerned. Packing a trunk is an art by itself. The important thing is to pack tight. If the trunk has two trays and there are not enough things to fill them solid, fill in the bottom and one tray solid, and put in the other tray only things that can tumble without damage. Garments should be laid flat rather than rolled. It is useful to put heavy things at the bottom, for baggage smashers never regard a trunk's equilibrium. Fragile articles should not touch sides, top or bottom, for there they will get the full force of concussion. If corks are tied up, even ink bottles can be safely carried round the world in the middle of a trunk. Newspapers make good protection for things that projecting corners may hurt. And let no woman ask her husband to pack a hat or waist in a trunk. Let her take the awful responsibility herself. Of traveling bags, the extension style gets the most approval from experienced travelers. Extension bags are seldom ornamental, but the appearance of luggage is never considered abroad. They fit their contents, will hold a surprising amount, and are not so easily crushed that starched linen is likely to get wrinkled or a souvenir broken. Next in preference is that more recent invention, the dress suit case. It is the most easily packed, holds clothing with a few folds, protects its contents with its unyielding sides, and best of all, can be carried with less fatigue because it lets the handle come nearer the leg than is the case with other styles of bags, and to hold the hand away from the leg is one of the things that makes carrying irksome. English tourists have a fondness for the hold all or wrap up, a despicable looking thing made of canvas and bound with leather, which has its good points. As its name signifies, it is merely a stout covering, flexible enough to adapt itself to its contents, however bulky they may be. A hold all and an extension bag together will carry as much as a small trunk. As a substitute for the hold all, a yard and a half of rubber cloth and a shawl strap can be economically used, but don't take a cheap shawl strap. The stoutest is none too safe. The little things. I am addicted to the reticule habit, if I may extend a word usually applied to a woman's handbag, to cover the sort of satchel that of late years has been much used by men in their journeys between office and home, or away for a night. In long travels it serves as a receptacle for many convenient things that are too bulky for the pocket, yet may be lost or hard to get to in a large valise. In such a small bag can be conveniently carried the guidebook, the novel to be read on the train, timetables, field glasses, smoking utensils, when smoking is a habit, playing cards, and a score of other little things likely to be in demand at any time, as well as fruit or luncheons. Women will find a cloth shopping bag equally handy, especially on shipboard, where it can be taken on deck with the writing materials, book, or other little things which are likely to be needed during the day, and thus save tremulous trips to the stateroom. It adds to convenience if toilet articles are kept for the most part in separate bags and boxes. There should be a rubber bag for the sponge, a celluloid cover for the toothbrush, a celluloid box for the soap, and a soiled clothes bag. A woman will find use in a small bag for hairpins, brush, comb, and button hook, made with a drawstring so that it can be hung in plain sight. The toilet requisites of travelers are so nearly alike the world over that it seems almost superfluous to enumerate them. How absurd to tell any civilized being to take a toothbrush! Yet in the haste of packing, even a toothbrush may be overlooked, so it will do no hurt, at any rate, to print this list. Of course, the classification is based on personal notions. Essential: toothbrush in celluloid holder, shaving brush in celluloid holder, soap, pocket knife, comb and hairbrush, court plaster, ink bottle with spring cover, sponge, Vaseline, telescoping drinking cup, steamer rug, a thick carriage robe will serve on a pinch, shawl strap, clothes brush, scissors, stylographic or fountain pen, corkscrew, needles and thread, pin cushion and safety pins, toilet paper, in cloth case, twine, visiting cards, buttons, leather purse for coin, address book and pencil, collar buttons and shirt studs. For women, glove and shoe buttons, sewing silk, tapes, hooks and eyes, hat pins, and small pins, black and white. For anybody whose eyes are weak, colored glasses. For the nearsighted, extra spectacles. Desirable. Leather vial case to be bought of a dealer in medical goods or through any apothecary, containing vials of Jamaica ginger, cholera medicine, Listerine, arnica, medicine for coughs and colds, whiskey, toilet water, hamamelis, ink, paregoric, bootlaces and hat string, cathartic pills and quinine, seidlitz powders, pocket looking glass, pieces of flannel and cotton, hot water bag, a few elastic bands, also tags and labels, patent trouser buttons, playing cards, thin linen paper and envelopes, tape measure or pocket rule, diary, folding alcohol lamp, tube of toothpaste. For women, smelling salts. Comforts and luxuries. Aneroid barometer, also pocket thermometer. Paper covered novels. For smokers, Swedish matches, sometimes called fusées. Binocular glasses, combining the merits of field and opera glasses, or opera glasses. Flask. Compass, pocket tool chest, tools inside the handle. Small pillow for steamer chair and in trains. Clothing. Every self-respecting man and woman accustomed to the conventionalities of society wants at all times to be neatly dressed, but it is universally understood that the exigencies of travel do not permit the variety and elegance of costume customary and practicable at home. Indeed, good taste does not justify the display of elaborate gowns and millinery on steamers, in cars, and at the tables of hotels frequented by transient guests. The plainest garb, therefore, is permissible in traveling, and as a European tour very seldom takes one where a stylish appearance is essential, it is both needless and foolish to cumber one's self with a variety of wearing apparel. For the woman who does not expect to visit abroad, who plans nothing but sightseeing, and who makes a quick trip, one skirt will suffice, unless its wearer has the misfortune to be caught in a driving rain without protection. But in the ordinary course of travel that is not likely to happen. Even should she be obliged once or twice to stay in her chamber an hour or two while the skirt was dried at the kitchen fire, the bother would be less than that of carrying along an extra skirt. To be sure, the idea of wearing the same skirt for 2 or 3 months seems intolerable to most women before they go. But, though I have heard the verdict of many women who have made the journey, I have yet to find one who thinks more than a single skirt an actual necessity, though some advise a second if a trunk is taken. The skirt should be of some dark material, preferably a serge or mohair. A coat of the same material, with a silk waist and several shirt waists, will suffice for outer garments, except of course a waterproof. In winter abroad and at all seasons on the steamer, some sort of a wrap is necessary, perhaps the most comfortable being a cape ulster. Of course, it is absurd to wear on shipboard anything that will be damaged by salt water, for spray is sure to fly. Women should plan their garments for the voyage so that they can dress and undress with the utmost possible speed. 5 minutes delay in the stateroom may send one back to her berth, though she would have been all right could she only have reached the deck. Older clothes are the common thing on shipboard, but that does not mean shabby clothes. Whoever takes dilapidated garments on board, with the idea of throwing them away on reaching the other side, will grieve. Once the qualms of seasickness are gone, it is as satisfying to be neatly dressed on the ocean as it is on the land. The wise will not aim at elegance, nor be unhappy if the garments are not of the very latest and most extreme fashion, but they will regret appearing disreputable. Don't forget that steamer chairs give shoes more than usual prominence. A wrapper or bathrobe is a convenience on the steamer, but it is bothersome to carry about on land. Pajamas are highly recommended by men who have used them in berths, by reason of the protection they give against drafts and cold. In the cold rooms and damp beds of Southern Europe during the winter season, flannel or flannelette nightgowns will be found a comfort by both men and women. 2 sets of underclothing may be made to suffice, for washing is done very quickly at all foreign hotels. Yet most people will prefer to carry the slight additional weight of another set. Silk underwear has strong advocates among those who have tried it, and though costlier at the outset, it is said to be more economical in the long run, standing the laundering better. India, not China silk, is advised as being the more easily washed. It sheds rather than gathers dust, does not retain wrinkles, and keeps the body at an even temperature, as it does not conduct the heat so readily as cotton or wool. People who habitually wear thick woolen undergarments during American winters will find them no less comfortable in Southern Europe at the same season, though the thermometer may range much higher than on this side the water. On the way over, whether in summer or winter, women may find flannel knickerbockers or silk equestrian tights more convenient than thick petticoats. Another garment that in winter will be found most serviceable for both men and women is the sweater. As a comfort giver on the deck of the steamer, in railway cars when on long journeys, in hotel chambers, even in art galleries, and when driving, I have never found its equal. It is nearly as warm as an ulster, and far more comfortable when the wearer is walking. Thus far it has been monopolized by people with athletic proclivities, and custom does not permit its use as yet to elderly people, but I feel sure that when travelers come to understand its merits, they will make more use of it. Of course, I do not advise anybody to wear a sweater in Hyde Park, or the Bois, on the Boulevard des Italiens, or the Corso, at the theater, or the table d'hôte. In places where people congregate, everybody should want to dress in a way that will not attract attention by eccentricity, and it is true that one is never so much judged by dress as when traveling, because then one is judged entirely at first sight. But shivering memories of the railway cars of Europe, and the galleries of Italy in winter, of the passes of the Alps in summer, convince me that there are times when, even in the presence of strangers, comfort and health are of more consequence than appearances. As a general rule, however, one should wear in public abroad nothing that he would not wear in similar surroundings at home. Thick underclothing may or may not be welcome on shipboard according to the weather. Summer days at sea are often uncomfortably warm. A garment that deserves more popularity is called the Rigby, a substitute for the Mackintosh. I found it in Canada, and though it may be sold elsewhere, I have never seen it exposed for sale in the States. The dealer told me it had been chemically treated so that it was waterproof. Without doubting his veracity, I will merely quote the belief of others that it had been extra shrunk before making up. Anyway, it will stand any wetting to which it is likely to be exposed in travel. It is a soft plaid woolen, made long and with a cape, much more agreeable to the touch than the Mackintosh, and it can be folded, jammed, twisted, without getting to look disreputable till it is fairly worn out. I have used it for a blanket when camping in the woods, for a pillow, for an extra covering on cool nights when traveling, for a seat, for the outer covering of a shawl strap bundle during many weeks of travel, besides for the ordinary purposes of a waterproof and light overcoat, and I haven't been able to ruin the thing or even to injure it perceptibly. Perhaps it is made for women, though I have seen it only for men. It has seemed to me that if travelers of either sex, unable to find just this thing offered for sale, would have a long coat with detachable cape and without lining, made of a light soft woolen plaid, extra shrunk, they would find it in a foreign tour a most useful substitute for light overcoat, mackintosh, or ulster. I am not audacious enough to enter the domain of women's headwear, more than to suggest what ought to be self-evident, that the wind plays havoc with broad-brimmed hats, and that they are uncomfortable in railway cars, especially those abroad, for there the seats are always against partitions. The same suggestion may be made to men. The stiff, flat, wide brim of a straw hat is certainly less adapted to traveling than any other sort of brim. Indeed, men will find a stiff hat of any kind uncomfortable, whether it be derby or silk. Possibly it may violate the laws of good dress to wear a cap all the time, yet it is certainly the most pleasurable of all head coverings. A felt hat has its good points, but in summer it is warm. A cap that can be jammed into the pocket without injury on entering a church or museum is a great convenience, for to read from a guidebook while holding a stiff hat under one's arm requires unusual dexterity and good nature. A derby is, of course, the desirable hat in city streets, but a man could go all through Europe with a soft outing cap and never feel that his head covering was attracting attention or making him the subject of unpleasant comment. Of course, if ceremonious calls are to be made, the conditions are quite different. I refer to traveling in Europe, not to staying there. On the boat the woman tourist will find a cap, tam o' shanter, or hood the most useful thing, and for men a soft hat or cap is a sine qua non. For the feet, light colored shoes are, on the whole, preferable, because they look better with less care. Every healthy tourist is sure to do a great deal of walking, and many a night the feet will ache. So only the easiest of shoes should be worn, and for the same reason slippers will prove a big relief in hotels and pensions. Women should take a pair of soft, heelless dressing slippers. Outing shirts for men are far the most comfortable, and they have the decided advantage of not yielding so quickly to the grime of railway trains and the perspiration of exercise, which the traveler cannot avoid. Now that for 4 or 5 months of the year they are commonly worn in the daytime, their suitability for travel is beyond question. At the table d'hote and at any place of resort after dark, the white shirt and collar are of course desirable, and almost every man, after a day's sightseeing or car riding, is glad to get into fresh garments of a somewhat more genteel character, so that a white shirt or two should be found in every traveling bag. But in the daytime the younger men, at any rate, may safely give the outing shirt the preference. The tourist with even the most dapper instincts can afford to remember that common sense does not demand him to compete in dress with the men he will see in Piccadilly or the Unter den Linden. What is called a business suit is the most appropriate costume a man can wear, and it is needless for him to take along any other. Of course there is satisfaction in putting on a black coat Sundays or for dinner, but its absence will not be remarked. A dress suit is wholly needless for almost every tourist. If you get the chance to attend some dinner party or state function, hire a dress suit if you can't borrow one. Unless you have intimate friends living abroad, the chances of such a need are remote. You would not like to sit in certain parts of the Opera House at Paris unless you were in evening dress. There are plenty of seats where a black cutaway or Prince Albert will be just exactly as satisfactory to yourself and everybody else, and a sack suit will arouse no comment. Walking sticks are an encumbrance that will not be endured by men not irretrievably bound to the cane habit. Many will prefer not to take an umbrella, but to buy one should imperative occasion arise. It may not happen at all that you will be in rain where an umbrella will be demanded. Women will need the lightest of rubbers, men will not need them. The streets of all European cities are paved, and you never come across anything like genuine American mud. In Northern Europe in winter, galoshes might occasionally prove useful, but the streets are so quickly cleared of snow that they are less serviceable than in the States. Women are likely to need rubbers on shipboard by reason of wet decks, and an extra pair of shoes against the chance of waves wetting one pair. In all this advice it will be noticed that comfort is the first consideration, style the last. This is partly because style is actually of less consequence in Europe than in America, for though the aristocrats of London are the best dressed men in the world, and the demi-monde of Paris displays the women who think themselves the best dressed women in the world, the mass of the people are more indifferent to the dictates of fashion than those of American cities, and there is a variety in costume which relieves the stranger from appearing odd if he consults his purse or fancy. But the advice is given chiefly because comfort is, indeed, the most important thing in travel, for travel is hard work, hard physical work, and it cannot be enjoyed if the demands of the body are ignored. Food and drink. Most important of bodily demands is that of the stomach. Fortunately, the traveler in Europe has little need of counsel in this regard, for the cooking is uniformly superior to that of America, and, except in Great Britain and Holland, the customs do not encourage overeating, perhaps the most prolific cause of bodily disorders. In Central and Southern Europe, it is the universal practice that the first meal of the day shall consist of coffee or chocolate with a roll and butter. This seems all wrong to the American before he gets there. He thinks he never will be able to last till luncheon time if he can't add at least an egg or two, and a beefsteak or mutton chop would not be unwelcome. Yet, after trying the continental plan for a week, rare is the American who hungers for the hearty American breakfast. Nevertheless, Americans who go back and forth frequently tell me that, though on the other side the coffee and roll seem amply sufficient, the moment they land in New York they have to go back to more substantial dishes. Perhaps the climate has something to do with it. Certain it is, too, that the Briton and the Dutchman, when at home, insist on starting the day with a liberal supply of fuel, perhaps because their cold winters demand it. The continental custom of serving both luncheon and dinner in courses prevents fast eating, and therefore is more healthy than the American custom, though very trying to the American patience. Each portion seems small, and nobody has the audacity to ask for a second help. Yet somehow, when you have finished, your appetite has been satisfied. Bean ascribes to this the fact that on his last trip he lost 20 pounds, yet came home in better health than he had enjoyed for years. And it is sure that sickness among American travelers abroad is rarer than among an equal number of Americans of the same station in life at home, though doubtless that is partly because they are usually in good health when they start. When you have your choice of dishes, as at cafes, order what is local if you want the best. What can you expect if you order salmon in Switzerland or macaroni in Edinburgh? Food is one of the few things where price is no index of quality. The cheapest dishes are often the most delicious. Wine is another article that is best where it is produced. It is often hurt by transportation, and away from its home it is often adulterated. For example, it is almost impossible for any but an expert to get pure sherry anywhere save in Jerez, Spain. The most delicious of Italian wine, the Montefiascone, is only to be found at its best in the neighborhood of Orvieto, for it is injured even by carrying as far as Rome, and would be utterly worthless if conveyed to Paris. For that reason it is cheap at Orvieto in spite of its excellence. Therefore the wine of a district, the vin ordinaire, is not to be despised because it is of low cost. From the fact that wine is the common beverage of the Latin countries and beer of the Germanic countries, it does not follow that Americans must use either wine or beer. So many American and English believers in total abstinence have successfully fought to get water or milk in continental hotels, that now the total abstainer attracts no attention. Tolerable drinking water is always to be secured, but it is usually not as cold as we like it, and the European does not appreciate our wish that it be freshly drawn. The water in the carafes always to be found on the washstands in European hotels is supposed to be fit for drinking, even though it may have been put there hours before. Tobacco. The smoking American has a hard time of it on the continent. In several of the countries, notably France, Spain, and Italy, the trade is in the hands of the government, or so enormously taxed that it is virtually a government monopoly. Whatever may be the benefits to the national exchequer, there are certainly none to the consumer, and if a nationalist or state socialist wants arguments to support his theories, let him shun the subject of European tobacco. Pipe smokers will find no plug tobacco abroad. They can get American brands of long cut or fine cut only at exorbitant prices. Where the monopoly prevails, the common smoking tobaccos offered for sale will cure the habit if anything will. Italian cigars are about the meanest cigars man ever perpetrated on a suffering community. French cigars are not much better. Havanas can be bought in the Latin countries at high rates. The Germanic races come nearer understanding what is good in the tobacco line. Cigars are cheap in Switzerland, cheaper in Germany, and dog cheap in Holland. In fact, Holland is the paradise of smokers. Tobacco is absolutely free of duty there, if I understand right, and partly by reason of the fact that Sumatra is a Dutch possession. Holland leads the world in some branches of the tobacco trade, so the discreet smoker will bring home from Holland as many cigars as he can. In Rotterdam or Amsterdam, he can buy for 2 cents apiece cigars that in many American cigar stores would retail for 10 cents straight, and for 5 cents he can get luxury that in America a millionaire would deem extravagance. The cigarette habit prevails in France, Italy, and Spain, so that decent cigarettes can be bought, but Turkish or Egyptian cigarettes are not given away. In Germany and Austria, pipe smoking is more common, and in Great Britain it would seem as if most men smoked a pipe, both indoors and out. Manners and customs. Americans and Englishmen do not bear a good reputation on the continent in point of manners. The typical Briton is believed to be a brute, the typical Yankee a bore. Unfortunately, our nation has been too often represented abroad by shoddy aristocrats, the newly rich. Of late we have sent over every year a much larger proportion of refined and cultivated people, who are gradually redeeming our reputation, and some of our observant countrymen are vain enough to think we are nearing the ideals of courtesy faster than the English. Without infringing on the hallowed precincts of a book of etiquette, and without expecting that the most sensible advice can move the prejudices of the innately vulgar, yet I may hazard a few suggestions and a little information to the American who realizes the good sense of adapting himself somewhat to the customs of the nation he may visit. First of all, it may be pointed out that courtesy is so common among the people of the continent as to make the lack of it more offensive than in our own less considerate land. Nothing whatever is to be gained by the dictatorial manner, even when dealing with Europeans of the lower classes. A smile will accomplish much more than a frown. The good-natured man will travel with far more ease and comfort than the man who frets and fumes and scolds and swears. More flies are caught with molasses than with vinegar. Remember that the old traveler is self-contained. He makes the best of the situation without venting to his neighbor either surprise or indignation. Of all travelers, the fussy man is the biggest bore. If you don't like things and there is no remedy, keep your mouth shut. The kicker may get more, but at what a cost. Of course, on the first trip, a great many things are new and at first sight uncomfortable. But when a thing is, there is usually a reason for it and a justification. Give it a fair test, learn it before you grumble about it. Human hogs are always met in traveling. The American instinct is to fight for one's rights and baffle the hog. But if American shrewdness fails to carry the day, better leave the field to the hog. There is little satisfaction and much discomfort in open battle with him. The human iceberg is almost as disagreeable, and strange to say, its nationality is more likely to be American than anything else. Just as the Puritans reasoned that all pleasure must be sinful, so in our reaction from the free and easy manners that gave Dickens and others the chance for ridicule half a century ago, some of our ultra-cultured people are going to the extreme of frigidity and formality. Probably it was an American aristocrat who refused to help a drowning man because she had not been introduced to him. But considerations of humanity aside, the truth is that courtesy should ever rise superior to conventionality. Courtesy does not require one to embrace every stranger, but it does call for conversation at dinner tables and for companionship in diligences, railway compartments, and other places where people must pass time close together. The people of the continent are very considerate in this regard, and the higher their rank, the more gracious their bearing. Two of the pleasantest and kindest dinner companions I ever met turned out to be a German countess and baroness, and their titles remained unknown to me for several days after they first said good morning in the pension at Rome, where chance threw us together. At evening in the parlor they led in all endeavors towards sociability. What a contrast that parlor was to the parlor of an American summer hotel! It was the difference between June and December. Courtesy abroad does not go by strata. People there know how to be gracious to their social inferiors without being condescending. On the Continent every woman, no matter what her dress or occupation may show to be her station in life, gets at least the outward tokens of respect. In France the commonest drudge must be saluted as Madame. Every man, even to the humblest, is Monsieur. In Italy it should be Signore or Signora, in Spain Signor or Signora. In the Germanic countries no appellation of this sort is customary in addressing strangers, but the salutation is always couched in respectful phrase. In Great Britain, however, salutations to strangers are as awkward and unceremonious as with us, worse in fact, because there one must not use the interjectional "sir" so freely as we use it. To an Englishman that term is more one of servility than of courtesy, and it is not to be used in addressing men supposed to be of socially inferior position. By the way, it is not commonly taught in the schools, nor told in the books, that the familiar French phrase, s'il vous plaît, if you please, is not the proper phrase to employ where there is no flavor of command. It may be addressed to a waiter or chambermaid or anybody else in giving an order, or what amounts to an order, but not properly to the host when accepting something at table, nor in general when the idea to be expressed is our "with pleasure," volontiers, or something of the sort is then preferable. The English phrase that most worries and wearies the American is "thank you." By tradespeople, clerks, everybody of low degree, it is used interminably without any regard to its meaning, and pronounced with a peculiar rising inflection that rasps the ear till it becomes intolerable. Everywhere on the Continent it is usual to say "good day" in the language of the locality on entering or leaving an office or a shop. Frequently it is spoken on entering or leaving a railway compartment, and the almost universal custom at such moments is for men to salute by raising the hat or a courteous bow. Also, it is the proper thing when entering or leaving the dining room of a hotel or pension, to salute or to bow a farewell to those who may be at table. A party of Americans entering late the dining room of a small hotel in Spain saw at a separate table a group of Spanish gentlemen enjoying their after dinner cigars. Though there were ladies in the American party, Spanish courtesy did not demand that the Spaniards should stop their smoking, but presently it was noted that when they left the room each Spaniard bowed courteously to the Americans, though their table had been at some distance and not a word had been interchanged. On the streets of continental cities the most striking difference between foreign customs and those of America is in the handling of the hat. Men ordinarily salute each other by lifting the hat, and of course they pay the same compliment to all women of their acquaintance. A most admirable practice is the respect shown to grief by lifting the hat whenever a coffin passes. All men will do this, whether the coffin contains prince or pauper. It is a custom that every American will do well to bring home with him. In all offices and banking rooms it is usual to remove the hat, sometimes in cafes and even in confectionery shops. The stranger who neglects this may find himself requested to do it in Germany or Russia, and it is not uncommon to ask it even in the post offices and hotel lobbies of Russia, often because of the holy image standing in some dark corner. Ladies will not encounter such requests save on the floor of some of the leading Parisian theatres, where hats are not permitted to be worn. Possibly the time will come when every woman in every audience room everywhere will realize the injustice she does to those behind her by wearing either a high hat or a high coiffure, and all men will bless that freak of fashion which some day may induce ladies to dispense with their headwear indoors altogether. Americans going abroad for business purposes are at first at a loss as to how to dress to best advantage. In London The silk hat and frock coat are an essential to the business man who would get a respectful hearing. Should he enter an office clad in the usual business suit of New York or Chicago, he would at the outset handicap himself by giving an unfavorable impression, for all the self-respecting merchants and moneyed men of London follow the fashion set by the Bank of England in ordering its clerks to wear tall hats and black frock coats during business hours. Yet cross over to a German city and that costume would be enough to arouse the suspicion of frivolity or shallowness, for your substantial German merchant or manufacturer has little respect for the niceties of dress. The etiquette of large commercial and manufacturing establishments abroad is formal and uncompromising. If an American approaches their officials with the brusque, breezy manner common to many of our pushing business men, he will be met with a rebuff that will freeze him, and no amount of argument will overcome the prejudice he will have aroused. A man of affairs who had occasion to visit the leading cities of the Germanic countries on a business mission thus describes the procedure. On entering an office, your name and business must be stated to an attendant, who shows you into a small waiting room, always provided for the purpose. The servant takes your card within, and if your visit is in order, you are in due course shown into the presence of the manager, usually termed Herr Director. Before entering, you must leave on the table in the anteroom your hat and stick. The proper greeting is to bow low, place your right hand on your left breast, and say, "I have the honor." Then you hope the director has enjoyed good health, and add something complimentary if you are quick-witted enough to think of the right thing to say. By this time the frown on the brow of the great man has faded, he produces cigars, is amazed that you do not smoke, and the conversation drifts into the business in hand. If he invites you to go into an adjoining room or out into the works, the matter of precedence in passing through the door suddenly assumes importance, and it often takes half a minute to get the tangle straightened out. The director motions you forward, but you fall back and implore him, "Bitte, Herr Director." He says an urgent bitte to you, but you are firm, and he gravely passes out before. You meet him later on the street, and if the acquaintance is well advanced, he takes his hat entirely off, dips it twice, and advances rapidly with extended hand to greet you, you of course doing the same. Then the hours. While the workmen are in their places at 7 o'clock, the office seldom begins before 8:30 or 9, and you must never appear for business until after 10. At that hour all business, mechanical and commercial, comes to a stop, and the men repair to the nearest beer shops and restaurants for beer or wine and a light lunch. This takes half an hour. Then at 12 all hands knock off for a leisurely dinner, followed by a long quiet smoke with perhaps a game of cards, a newspaper, or a discussion. This intermission lasts 2 hours, and during the period business comes as completely to a standstill as if it were Sunday or a holiday. Wholesale houses, manufactories, brokers' offices, banks, etc., are closed up tight as a drum. At 2 o'clock the doors are unlocked and the wheels begin to move. From that hour till 7 and even 8 o'clock at night, commercial business goes on steadily. The mechanic works cheerfully 10 and 11 hours and subscribes funds for his English brothers striking for 8. There is some variation in these practices in different continental countries, but substantially they are the same everywhere. Men move much more slowly than with us. Italians have an odd way of beckoning. In America, people wave the hand toward them when they desire a person's approach. In Italy, it is just the opposite. When an Italian waves a goodbye to you with his hand, you imagine he is calling you back. And if he wants you to approach, he motions with his hand, as Americans do in making a gesture of repulsion. Somewhere I have picked up a list of the insults that an American may unwittingly offer to a foreigner. Without vouching for the accuracy of the statements, I give them for what they are worth. In England, if a friend is visiting another and stays to dinner, he may ask for the loan of a hairbrush without giving offense, but in Hungary he may not. To attempt to borrow that useful article is one of the greatest insults which can be offered to a Hungarian, and one which will in most cases cause a duel. In France, the unwary foreigner may be visiting a friend and may put his hat upon the bed. This is a grievous form of insult, but why it is not known. It is a very ancient one, and so probably results from an old superstition. Again, there are two ways of pouring out wine in France, as everywhere else. One of these is to hold the bottle so that while pouring, the thumb is facing the tablecloth. The second way is to hold the hand reversed, that is, with the knuckles downward, and this is a great insult to the assembled guests and the host, a far greater insult than drinking a health in water, and that is pretty serious in France. In Germany, to offer to a lady a rose or any other flower, without any green or leaves with it, is to insult her deeply, though why this should be so is not known precisely. In Italy, it is deemed insulting to refuse a pinch of snuff. End of section 14.
Section 15 of Going Abroad, Some Advice. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michael Fassio. Going Abroad, Some Advice by Robert Luce. Chapter 10. Somewhat Literary. It is not necessary to know the least thing about any foreign language in order to enjoy a European tour and profit by it. Every decent hotel on the common lines of travel has at least one employee who can speak English, usually the portier, who knows anywhere from 3 to half a dozen languages enough for conversational purposes. Often, too, the head waiter speaks English, and frequently there are others at hand able to understand you. Indeed, the readiness with which his own tongue is understood grieves and annoys the traveler who has hoped in the ordinary course of travel to learn something of foreign tongues. Abandon that expectation. Outside the hotels, there is a slight necessity for being a linguist, though it is often advantageous. To master the names of the coins and to learn to count will answer all absolute requirements, and that can be done in an hour. Even this is not necessary when anybody else in the party already knows it. Carry a phrase book in your pocket, and you can ordinarily find someone who can read the questions to which you point, if you dare not try pronunciation. Statisticians flatter us by proving that English is the coming language of the civilized world, that more people will speak it than any other, perhaps already speak it. However that may be, certain it is that French has not yet surrendered its paramount position. It is the native tongue of but a small fraction of the world's population, but it unmistakably leads as the second best language, so to speak, the language studied and acquired by more people than any other. It is the language of diplomacy, the language of fashion, and the language of travel. So, for the sake of convenience, let me use it to symbolize all foreign languages, and say of it what may be said of any of the rest. Learning a language. Every American who has studied French at home feels a keen disappointment when he goes to Paris. He may not have been vain enough to expect that his school French would be of much use, but he has felt certain that it would be of some use. In fact, however, it is practically unavailable wherever the ear is concerned. Of course, to read French is no more difficult in Paris than in Boston, but to understand it is much harder in a Parisian hotel or audience room than in an American classroom. The reason is simple. In the classroom, it has been enunciated slowly and with distinctness, but on its native heath it runs like a hare. When speaking English in conversation, we give full weight to but a small part of the letters. The intuition of the auditor fills in the blanks between the few sounds his ear really catches. The Frenchman does the same, but your classroom practice has not cultivated the intuition to the extent necessary for comprehending the foreign conversation. The Frenchman doesn't really talk so very fast. It is your brain that is going so very slow. Even if you have learned to converse readily with a French teacher, you will for days be helpless in a Parisian conversation, for you have learned the vocal habits of but one person, and these habits vary more than the features or the carriage. You must learn 1,000 intonations, 1,000 accents, before you get facility. This training of the ear, the vocal organs, The brain and the nerves that telegraph between them takes time, practice, study, and genuine hard work. At the very quickest, it will take 3 months of life in a French family, and study in every feasible way before a foreigner will be justified in saying that he can speak and understand ordinary French, and it will be a year before he can deem himself an adept. He can never get a really thorough command of its idioms. If he goes to France after the age when children cease to acquire language wholly by ear, and begin to understand their principles. So if any man who did not leave America till after he was a dozen years old tells you he can speak French like a native, set him down as a braggart and a liar, for he knows he can't. Children acquire a foreign tongue with a rapidity that to the adult seems marvelous. It is a pity that more of them are not taken abroad during the years when they can become linguists without money and without prize, better still, without time and hard work. I have been speaking of the ability to carry on a continuous conversation in French. That is quite different from the ability to understand a lecture or a sermon. The formal speaker enunciates more clearly, speaks more slowly, uses less idioms and no colloquialisms. Therefore, to hear lectures and sermons is the best beginning for a vocal study of French, and I would advise everyone who goes to Paris with the idea of studying the language to attend as many conferences at the Sorbonne as possible, to attend French Protestant churches on Sunday mornings, and to frequent the theaters as much as the purse will permit. On the stage, however, the flow of words is almost as rapid as in conversation, and it will always be well to read over the play in advance. In Paris, it is almost always possible to hear standard plays that can be bought or found in a circulating library. The classic comedies are given most frequently at the Odeon, the theater in the Latin Quarter, which ranks as the second best theater in France in point of acting. Like the Comédie Française, which leads the world, it gets a subsidy from the government, in return for which it is bound not only to give frequent performance of standard works, but also to present them at reduced prices, that they may be not too costly for students. The demand for tickets is not great, and excellent seats can be easily secured at prices which make it about the cheapest sort of French instruction. By taking the book and following the play, the ear will be aided, and, better still, the correct pronunciation can be learned. In conversation, few people pronounce correctly, either in English or in French, but incorrect pronunciation would not be tolerated on the stage of the Odeon or the Comédie Française. Indeed, the theater is so much of a national institution in France that it sets the standard for pronunciation and elocution. At the Comédie Française, the prices are higher and the attendance larger, so that though its acting is the best in the world, for the student of French, it is not so convenient as the Odeon. In many of the other theaters, slang and idiom bother the student. It is not difficult to acquire French enough for traveling purposes, to learn to ask for what you want, to barter, to inquire your way, to direct the cabman. The number of words required for these purposes is surprisingly small. Indeed, the vocabulary of all ordinary conversation is very limited. But it is the vocabulary that you must have, not the grammar. Better know 100 nouns and a few adjectives than be able to conjugate every irregular verb in the language. Words, words, words are what you want. Rules, rules, rules can go to perdition for all the good they are in a traveler's predicaments. The man who will memorize 200 words on the way across will get along better than the man who can translate a novel to perfection. Bean, who has an excellent reading knowledge of French, tells me that the first time he took a bath in Paris, he found when he was ready to leave the tub that there was no towel in the room. Ringing for an attendant, he tried to ask for a towel, but to save him he couldn't think of the French word for it. As it is not uncommon for people to take their own towels to the bath, and if you want one furnished you must get it when you go in, the attendant was not quick to comprehend what Bean wanted, so he chattered and dripped and chattered for several minutes before he could show by gestures what he needed. How to put words together is a matter of minor importance for the traveler, but the schools teach that first, for they have in mind reading rather than speaking. It is better to know a little French thoroughly than a deal of it imperfectly. There is no time to study the question that may be asked, to puzzle it out, Now and then you can get it repeated very slowly, but that is impractical in conversation. Listen at the dinner table, and though you might be able to translate every word were it spoken by itself, yet if the important words of a sentence do not on the instant convey an impression to the mind, they will be drowned by the following sentences, and the conversation will be unintelligible. So have what you do know at your tongue's end, or just at that part of the brain to which the message is telegraphed from the ear. Add to thorough knowledge little by little, and in time mastery will come. The trouble with about all the grammars and phrase books is that they mix thoroughly the words and rules seldom needed with those constantly needed. The second person singular of the imperfect subjunctive, which you wouldn't use or hear in a lifetime, maybe is just as prominent in the grammar as the first person of the present indicative, which will be used constantly. There are 100 ways of getting a book knowledge with a foreign language, and each has its friends. In advocating one of them, I seek no quarrel with the others. It is merely a personal belief that the quickest course is to read the grammar through without study, in order to get an idea of the structure of the language, then to read it carefully, a little each day, but to put the most of time into searching analysis of simple diction. Take a French play by some modern writer, preferably a drama of society, and write out a translation of a page or two. The next day, try to rewrite it in French and compare with the original. For study by oneself, surely this has its advantages. But when practicable, this should be merely accessory to conversation with a French teacher, who should be asked to speak little or no English in the course of the lesson. The best way to learn to read French is to read, not with a dictionary, but as an English book would be read, not translating at all, but reading in French. The first time you try this, you will doubtless get but a slight inkling of the opening chapter. In the second, a glimpse of the story will reveal itself. By the time the book is finished, most of it will have been comprehended. Common essential words that at first were not understood will after a while be learned by guessing with the help of the different contexts. A word that persistently evades may at last be looked up in the dictionary. Then it will not be forgotten, as it would have been had you looked it up in the first time you saw it. The great thing is to learn to think in the language you would speak or understand, and not to translate. That comes only with time and training, but in time it will come to anybody. Guidebooks. Baedeker's guidebooks are undoubtedly the best ever printed. For the tourist who wants to do any city or country thoroughly, they are indispensable. Prepared with characteristic German regard for minutiae and accuracy, they come as near perfection as bookmaking can accomplish. Frequent editions keep them up to date, and it is reasonably safe to trust them in every detail. The only criticism that can be made on them is that they are somewhat voluminous for the hurrying tourist, and as there is one for each country, sometimes 2 or 3 for a country, they are rather bulky for transportation. This difficulty can be overcome by getting them as you go along. They are to be found in every city. Then, when you leave a country, mail its guidebook to yourself in care of your banker in London, with memorandum, to be held till called for, or not to be forwarded. On your last visit to the banker, get the books and forward them home with you. They will prove invaluable there to refresh your memory or hazy points, to aid you in giving advice to others about to make the trip, and for the fund of historical, geographical, and statistical information they contain. This may seem rather expensive, for the Baedekers average to cost not far from $2, but to go without them is penny wise and pound foolish. Rightly used, they save far more than they cost, directly, through their information about hotels, about prices of admission, about where to give fees and where not to give, and how much the fee should be, if any, about cab fares, and all the other routine expenditures, and indirectly, through the gain of time by knowledge, when places are open, what routes to take for covering a city systematically, and where the important sites are to be found. The last benefit is not the least. Nothing is more vexatious than to be reminded after you have left a place of something you have omitted, which then is more than likely to seem as important as all the rest put together. I pin my faith on Baedeker, and do not profess to thorough acquaintance with other series, but with the help of a comprehensive article on the subject by a well-informed and accurate writer, John Ritchie, Jr., I can add to my own observations enough to cover the ground. Of general guides to Europe, 4 are published in this country. 2 of them, a Satchel Guide, published by Houghton, Mifflin and Company, Boston, and Cassell's Complete Pocket Guide to Europe, published by William R. Jenkins, New York, are of the small, single-volume variety, more convenient for the pocket or handbag. They take in the parts of Europe usually visited by vacation tourists, and even for the traveler planning a long journey, serve a desirable end by giving a bird's-eye view of the whole ground to be covered, thus enabling him to arrange his trip with due regard to proportion, and to make a rough schedule of it in advance. Appleton's 3-volume guide covering the whole of Europe is tolerably accurate, and if Baedeker's are not bought, will be comprehensive enough for countries where the stay is short. Loomis's Index Guide to Travel and Art Study in Europe, issued by Scribner's, contains a deal of solid information, but will hardly repay a vacation tourist for the burden of carrying it about, however useful it might be as a book of reference to one staying abroad for study. It is not a guidebook in the ordinary sense of the term. In Europe are published 6 considerable series of guidebooks, dealing with countries or localities in separate volumes, and either written originally in English or translated into English wholly or to the extent of some volumes. Besides Baedeker's are those of Murray, Black, Cook, Orell Fussli, and Worrell. Murray's volumes have so long been the standby of the Briton that half the time he says Murray when he means guidebook. There are about 30 of them for England and its localities, as many more for the continent, substantial volumes averaging about $2.35 in cost, accurate and copious, but to my mind not conveniently arranged for consultation. Cook's guides, issued by the tourist agency, are newer in the field, are less numerous and less costly, and not so elaborate, the last a feature of merit or the opposite according to the needs of the individual tourist. Black, with his great list of more than 50 local British guides, has one of 20 for restricted districts of continental Europe, most of them ranging between 25 and 60 cents in price, and well worth the money of the man who wants thorough information on localities. The 2 German series are little local guides to cities or districts, and cost about 10 cents each. The Worrell handbooks are published in Leipzig, and in the original German number more than 500 titles. About 20 of them are in English. They are paper-covered pamphlets of about 50 pages each, and are excellent in their way, although they are but little known to Americans. The Orell Fussli guides are larger in form, and about 200 parts have been issued in English. More than 200 volumes in the nature of guidebooks relate to England. Baedeker's Great Britain covers England, Wales, and Scotland, but not Ireland, and it gives but a dozen pages to London, abridging for them the volume that is devoted to London alone. The price of the Great Britain volume would warrant the publisher in putting into both books at least the matter related to the environs of London. The traveler may be justifiably annoyed, for instance, to find a description of Stoke Poges or Hampton Court omitted from a volume entitled Great Britain. And the book would be no thicker than Switzerland volume if it included Ireland. However, as far as it goes, it is excellent. Murray has volumes on London as it is, the environs of London, England and Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and a score of counties or groups of counties, with 5 handbooks of cathedrals. Cassell has issued a pictorial England and Wales. Smith has written a handy guidebook, and Whiting has published an annual holiday directory. For London especially, there are Baedeker, Murray, Black, Cook, and Cassell, to which may be added Murray's publication, London Past and Present, in 3 volumes, an exhaustive work for the library table. Then there is Dickens's Dictionary, now in its 20th year, the London Handbook of the Grosvenor Press, Routledge's Diamond Guide, Simpkins' London, which come in a number of forms of from 14 to 19 years standing, and Ward's Guide to London, now in its 16th year. Most of these are revised each year. For the benefit of pedestrians, there are issued Rustic Walking Routes by Evans and Walk from London to Fulham by Crocker. Chetwynd also has written an Environs of London, a guide for team or cycle. For the rest of Great Britain, there are locality books too numerous to mention. In any town bookshop, one may take his choice between several relating to the vicinity. Then there are such books as Bradshaw's Dictionary of Health Resorts, An Oarsman's Guide to the Rivers and Canals of Great Britain and Ireland, Cowper's Sailing Tours for yachtsmen, a dozen handbooks for cyclists, the Spas of Wales, rock climbing in the English Lake District, etc., etc. For Ireland, 5 of the larger firms have issued a guidebook each. The French publisher, Ballière, has issued one. Flynn's Ireland, and of more pretentious nature and to be highly recommended, is Russell's Beauties and Antiquities of Ireland. Switzerland has a dozen or so of the Orell Fussli guides, nearly as many of the Whirl series, and one each of the English publications. In addition, there are the English Red Book for Switzerland, issued by Paul, Picturesque and Descriptive Guide by Ward Lock and Company, and How to Visit Switzerland by Lunn, who is a conductor of large excursions and has also written How to Visit Italy. Visitors to Austria will find in their hand Singer and Wolfner's Handbook, which includes Hungary and Budapest, and Malleson's Lakes and Rivers of Austria, Bavaria, and Hungary, which is a little more in detail in the English publishers' volumes. Norway has 2 guidebooks, Bennett's Handbook and Goodman's Best Tour. This country is coming into prominence and has been the subject for half a dozen descriptive volumes, among which may be noted Curie's compact little book on Norway and the Norwegians, and New Ground in Norway, published by Nunes. In the latter, the author describes regions little known to us, but to which the Norwegians themselves have made their way in summer, much as we go to the White Mountains or to the seashore. Sweden has perhaps the strongest tourist club of any of the European countries. It has 8 or 10,000 members, most of whom travel more or less and with certain advantages. For the benefit of its members, the Swedish club issues at short intervals its guides, which may be procured in German or in English. In all the other parts of Europe frequented by travelers, one may find locality handbooks costing usually 10 or 20 cents, which will effectively supplement the satchel guides for those who feel they cannot afford Baedekers, but don't get along without the Baedekers if you can help it. Then, too, there are the more costly volumes that are and are not guidebooks, not designed to meet the more prosaic needs of the tourist, but meant to make his sightseeing more intelligent and instructive. Some of them have genuine literary merit, such as the Hare volumes, Walks in Paris, Walks in Rome, Cities of Southern Italy and Sicily, etc. As Mr. Ritchie well says, Rome seen without Hare's walks in hand is but half seen. Rutledge prints the volumes with paper type and margins that suit them to the library shelf rather than to the traveler's satchel, and they are hardly worth attention on the spot from the man who can stay only a day or two. But I would urge them on anybody passing a week or more in any of the places they cover. Akin to these are such volumes as those of Mrs. Clement on Constantinople, Venice, Naples, all handsomely illustrated. One of the same sort on Florence, by Virginia W. Johnson, on Rouen, by Theodore A. Cook, on Nuremberg, by Cecil Headlam, and other of the smaller cities of the continent. These can be generally found in the bookshops of the place to which they relate. Remember Ruskin's Stones of Venice. Tourists who visit the Chateau district southwest of Paris will enjoy A Little Tour in France by Henry James. Those who desire to understand thoroughly the development of cities where they may tarry will profitably study such books as Mrs. Oliphant's The Makers of Florence and The Makers of Venice. In the same class of books relating to the past rather than the present are Grant Allen's Historical Guides to Florence, Venice, Paris, and the Cities of Belgium. I think the last of the many volumes by this versatile writer to appear before his death in 1899 was The European Tour, designed particularly to be of service to Americans contemplating a journey abroad. It deals entirely with the educational aspect of the matter, telling what the author thought worth the seeing, and why. His verdict on Belgium differs radically from mine, given in an earlier chapter, for he says that, quote, "Except Italy, there is nothing in Europe so valuable, so instructive as Belgium. The reason is that Belgium in the north, like Italy in the south, formed the commercial and also therefore the artistic center of medievalism." Unquote. Acumen of this sort will suggest how useful the book may be to anyone going to Europe with study of its art and history as the all-important motive. Indeed, Mr. Allen started out by expressing the belief that a year of travel in Europe is worth more than a college education, and should be preferred where there is a choice between the two. Few will accept this dictum, but it need not prevent the book from inspiring and stimulating the desire to make the trip give more culture. The use of guidebooks, pure and simple, is worth a moment's reflection, for otherwise they may prove great time wasters. Voluminous guides like those of Baedeker sometimes confuse and embarrass the novice in travel, not yet trained in deciding what he wants to see or should see. At the outset, the conscientious man sallies forth each day with the intention of seeing everything the guidebook mentions. Happy the hour when he frees himself from its thraldom. It is worse than useless to go through a museum or gallery as a merchant goes through his shop when he takes account of stock. That course inevitably wastes time on minor matters, insignificant details. They cannot be remembered, and too often result in such a mental jumble that the really important things are lost from sight. That is the chief reason why my personal preference is against the use of catalogues and galleries. I would rather ramble along, enjoying what pleases me, than bore myself by learning that number 49 was painted by an artist of whom I never heard and don't want to hear. But each to his taste, and anybody who wants to be sure that he has seen so-and-so's Madonna or somebody's St. Sebastian is welcome to indulge his fondness for facts. Tourists who rely on their own researches will find maps indispensable, especially in cities like Paris and London. The Baedekers contain so many of these that it will often prove cheaper to buy a Baedeker in the first place. Old or second-hand copies are just as good for the maps, and for most of the information, but they should not be implicitly trusted in regard to such matters as the hours when museums are open. Indeed, changes in these particulars are so frequent that no guidebook can keep up with them, and it will always be safer to verify by inquiry at the hotel. Historical and place novels. It is both pleasant and profitable to read notable historical novels, and novels of places in the cities or regions where their scenes are laid. Naturally, of those written in English more relate to England than to any other country, and they are so many that it is hard to make selection, particularly in the matter of London, which has been taken as the scene of hundreds of novels. Dickens, however, stands so far above all the rest as the great novelist of London that I shall mention no others, barring only Sir Walter Besant, some of whose books, notably All Sorts and Conditions of Men, tell of a London that has grown up since Dickens's time. The cathedral towns have been favorites with many storytellers. Anthony Trollope's Barchester series will prove entertaining in any of them, and The Silence of Dean Maitland has much of its action laid in Winchester, though the scene of the tragedy unfolded in the opening chapters is supposed to have been not far from Newport, on the Isle of Wight. Other stories that pertain to places along the Channel are Besant's By Celia's Arbour, Portsmouth, and 'Twas in Trafalgar's Bay, Lyme Regis. Jane Austen's Persuasion, also Lyme Regis. Besant's Armour of Lyoness, The Scilly Isles. Victor Hugo's The Toilers of the Sea. Gilbert Parker's Battle of the Strong, and Hesba Stratton's The Doctor's Dilemma, Channel Islands. The stories told by Q. A.T. Quiller Couch mostly relate to Cornwall. Blackmore wrote Devonshire series, with Lorna Doone head and shoulders above the rest, but with Springhaven and Pearly Cross also good Devon tales. Mrs. Louisa Parr's Loyalty George is another Devon story, and the opening chapters of Charles Kingsley's inimitable Westward Ho are laid in Biddleford. Thomas Hardy writes much about the region anciently, the kingdom of Wessex. Most of the places and people he describes being of what is now known as Dorset, the country north and west of Southampton and Winchester. Going farther north, one comes to Warwickshire and the region from Oxford to Derby, the scene of Scott's Kenilworth and Woodstock, and George Eliot's best novels. At Stratford, William Black's Judith Shakespeare will edify. Then comes Rugby, known to every boy because Tom Brown went to school there. The fen country about Cambridge was the locality of Kingsley's Hereward. Charlotte Bronte's Shirley is a Yorkshire tale. Love and Quiet Life by Tom Cobley, Walter Raymond, tells of Somersetshire. Miss Mitford's Our Village Was in Berkshire. Mrs. Gaskell's Cranford will do for any English village, and her Mary Barton concerned Manchester. Mrs. Frances Hodgson Burnett wrote That Last Dolores about Lancashire incidents. Scotland has furnished some of the most noted storytellers and the scenes for many stirring novels. It is needless to enumerate those of the great Sir Walter, for everybody who reads novels knows that The Heart of Midlothian and the rest are Scotch tales. Then there is an old favorite with the boys, Jane Porter's Scottish Chiefs, and the books by the newer generation of Scotch literary artists. Stevenson, Kidnapped and the Master of Ballantrae, Barry, The Little Minister and Other Thrum Stories, Ian McLaren and Crockett. William Black's best stories are of the Scottish Highlands or Islands. The Isle of Man has been laid bare to the world by Hal Caine. The great Irish novelists have been Charles Lever and Samuel Lover. Much about Wales and the Welsh is told in a recent novel that has met with favor, Dunton's Alwyn. French novels have for the most part dealt more with the scum and froth of Parisian life than with France itself, its history, or its regions. The more thoughtful Frenchmen deny that the ordinary French novel is a true portrayal of their countrymen or countrywomen. But a noteworthy exception was the work of Balzac, who undertook in a voluminous series of stories under the general title of The Human Comedy to depict every class and type in the whole social scale of his time. The wonderful result makes many claim for him the rank of the foremost of the world's novelists. For understanding the France of the period after Napoleon's downfall, nothing could be better. Numerous translations have been made, and notably good are those of Miss Wormley. Paris, like London, abounds in stories, among them Dickens's Tale of Two Cities, covering both places at the Terror epoch. Hugo's Hunchback of Notre Dame should surely be read in Paris, and Du Maurier's Trilby by anyone staying in the Latin Quarter. The scene of Philip Gilbert Hamerton's Mamorne is laid in Burgundy, and the book gives some of the best descriptions of French country life to be found in English literature. Read Scott's Quentin Durward in Tours. Blanche Howard Willis's Gwen should be read in Brittany, and also in the original Lottie's Pêcheur d'Islande. Students of French will find a fascinating story with scenes scattered over French in Sans Famille. The Erckmann-Chatrain books have been translated into English and are among the best military stories of the century. Italy has furnished the motives and the scenes for much good fiction. The best Italian novel is Manzoni's The Betrothed, which will be found easy reading by beginners in Italian, or can be had in translation. The incidents occur about the Italian lakes and Milan. Two great writers have written up Italy in the story form. George Sand with Consuelo, and Anderson with The Improvisatore. Rome, past and present, has been a prolific theme for the novelist. For a course of Roman novel reading, one might begin with The Gladiators and follow it up with Quo Vadis. Canon Farrar's Darkness and Dawn, William Ware's Zenobia, Julian and Aurelian, Bulwer Lytton's Renzi, Guerrazzi's Beatrice Cenci, Hawthorne's Marble Fawn, Henderson's The Prelate, M.A. Tinctor's books, and finish with Crawford's Saracinesca series. At Naples, read The Last Days of Pompeii, Marie Corelli's Vendetta, Mrs. Stowe's Agnes of Sorrento, and Crawford's Adam Johnstone's Son, all the action of the last named occurring at Amalfi. Romola, of course, is the great story of Florence. Howell's A Foregone Conclusion relates to Venice, Ruffini's Dr. Antonio to the Riviera. Few novels of lasting reputation have been written about Germany, at least that have become commonly known to the English reading public. Charles Reade's best work, The Cloister and the Hearth, in part concerns Germany. Miss Mollbach and the Baroness Tautphoeus have written German stories that do nobody any hurt. The best-known novel by Mrs. Charles, The Chronicles of the Schoenberg Cotta Family, deals with Luther and the Reformation. Marlitt and Auerbach are other names to be looked up in library catalogs. Marthen Martens is the first Dutch novelist to arouse the enthusiasm of the English reading public. Bjornson and Boyesen are the Scandinavian novelists known in America, Tolstoy and Turgenev the Russian. Spanish novels by Valdez have been translated by N.H. Dole. Fuller's Chatelaine of Leternit and Harriden's Ships That Pass in the Night are located in Switzerland. Tourists in Egypt may peruse with enjoyment Kingsley's Hypatia, and for stories with a modern setting, Kismet by George Fleming, Julia C. Fletcher, and Adeline Sargent's Beyond Recall and Christine. It would not be worth while taking any of these from home. They can all be bought at the booksellers in the place to which they refer, or so nearly all that it would not pay to make provision against inability thus to buy them. On the continent, the Tauchnitz editions will be found everywhere, good print, paper covers, and reasonable in price. Novels should be read on the spot, or soon afterward. There is no advantage in reading them before going to the place, for unless the reader has an abnormal memory, few of them will remain in the mind without knowledge of localities at the time of reading. By the way, novels and most other books are customarily sold in paper covers on the continent, because book buyers there generally prefer to have their binding done in order on such books as they find worth keeping. Consequently, the price for binding to order is cheap. Preparatory reading. Some reading, however, can profitably be done before leaving home, and a winter's preparatory work is none too much. Most helpful will be found such historical knowledge as can be acquired. Let it be personal history rather than political, constitutional, or military. Except Waterloo, the traveler sees few battlefields, almost none that can greatly interest the imagination. With constitutions, governments, and politics he rarely comes in contact. But the pleasure of his excursions to Versailles and Fontainebleau will be heightened by knowing something about the kings and queens and nobles who once lived there. Sleepy, monotonous Holland will become alive with interest if the story of William the Silent and his heroic friends is familiar. Napoleon's magic name vivifies and glorifies 1,000 places. The historical personages idealized by Sir Walter Scott must be known in order that the scenes of their romantic and chivalrous deeds can be enjoyed to the utmost. The Alhambra and the Alcazar fail of their true significance. If the wonderful record of Moorish achievement in Spain has never been scanned, the Colosseum is but an artificial quarry, the Forum an ugly excavation, the Palatine a rubbish-strewn hill to the traveler who knows naught of the Caesars. Next in importance to the biographical side of the general history comes the history of art in all its branches. Much the larger part of the sightseeing hours are given to galleries, art museums, churches, public buildings that are themselves of artistic value and significance, or contain art treasures. He errs who thinks that the eye unaided by the intellect can reveal all their beauties, and that understanding is not essential to the full enjoyment of art. A symphony orchestra might delight even a savage, might charm the man who couldn't tell the difference between a trombone and a piccolo, but surely it can be appreciated only by the student of music. I asked Charles H. Moore, professor of art in Harvard College and author of an authoritative treatise on the development and character of Gothic architecture, to prepare a list of books that he would advise for the preliminary readings of persons of ordinary culture planning a European tour. Professor Moore suggests the following: F. D. Tarbell's History of Greek Art, published by Flood and Vincent, Meadville, Pennsylvania. Reber's History of Medieval Art, Harper and Brothers, New York. Russell Sturgis's European Architecture, The Macmillan Company, New York. Rose G. Kingsley's History of French Art, Longmans, Green and Company, New York. C. E. Norton's Church Building in the Middle Ages, Harper and Brothers, New York. Longfellow's The Column and the Arch, Charles Scribner's Sons, New York. H. Taine's Art in the Netherlands, Leopold and Holt, New York. Be sure that no hours will be wasted in learning how art conquered the medieval Italian, wherein St. Mark's differs from St. Paul's, what were the lives of Raphael and of Michelangelo, in acquiring the power to distinguish at a glance Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian columns, in mastering the details of Romanesque, Byzantine, or Gothic architecture. In finding out what the disciples of the Impressionist school of painting are striving to effect, be sure that the more you know on any topic when you leave home, the better estimate will you put on your ignorance when you return, and the keener ambition will you have for your knowledge. In that direction lies one of the greatest benefits of travel. It teaches a man how small he is, how much he has to learn. End of section 15. End of Going Abroad, Some Advice by Robert Luce.